Creatine makes your hair fall out, gives you kidney failure, and only builds your muscles, if you believe everything you hear. Let's look a little closer. Now, just to reiterate, I'm not an expert in any of this. The research and the work I've actually put forward for this video has actually just acted as a justification for me to get back on creatine. So a lot of this is just a high-level overview of the long and short-term benefits relative to where I want to be fitness-wise. So hopefully this can help you make that similar decision if you're in the same place. As with any supplement, credibility is a huge thing, and creatine monohydrate is the most researched supplement in the world, with almost 70,000 studies on PubMed.com. There are alternatives that are marketed as kind of more bioavailable or better for you, and these don't really have the volume of research behind it that creatine monohydrate does. But being that the bioavailability of creatine is close to 100%, you're really not getting that much benefit for the money you're paying. So just quickly, when we talk about bioavailability, we're talking about how much of this is used and absorbed in the body. It's generally a measure of efficiency and effectiveness. So creatine research is evolving, where the vast majority of that research has been done on men over the age of 18 in the past. Different demographics are now getting a much bigger focus. For this video, we're just going to focus on the studies that have actually been done up to date, and then we can have the future studies and anything that's currently being looked into addressed in a further video. So, for example, now in Australia, they're now looking at how creatine affects the fetus during pregnancy and how that development changes. And there are also some really cool studies looking into its effects on symptoms of mood disorders such as anxiety or depression, and also neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. But again, the volume of research isn't that high at the moment, and we're expecting to go leaps and bounds in these fields in the future. So the first myth I wanted to cover is that creatine builds muscle, which is not strictly speaking true. Now, when creatine enters the body, it is absorbed into our bloodstream in the digestive system, and then from there it is transferred to muscle cells from the blood with the help of insulin, which is what is created when we eat carbs. Now, when it's in the muscle, it undergoes a biochemical reaction to turn it from creatine into a substance called phosphocreatine. Now, this reaction changes the solute level of the muscle, and all the water from outside of the muscle will then transfer into the muscle because it's a higher solute solution. Now, this is a process called osmosis that we learned back in high school biology. And this causes muscle swelling due to all the water entering the muscle, not traditional muscle growth by tearing in the fibers. That's where sort of the disconnection comes from. So it does, however, influence muscle protein synthesis, and we'll touch on this more later, but it's just three main ways. Number one, by increasing the availability of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, by regulating the mTOR pathway, which itself regulates muscle growth, and then finally, by drawing all of this water into the muscle cell, it creates an anabolic environment which will stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So the second one is that creatine causes hair loss, and this comes from a study that was done back in 2009, which looked at the effect of creatine in, I believe it was 20 rugby players. And they found an increase in the level of DHT within those players that took creatine. Now, as a British man in his mid-20s, whose father's hair left before I was born, this is a topic very close to home. And I was quite relieved when I found out that this wasn't actually true. So a couple of issues with this study is that, number one, the actual overall increase in DHT was tiny due to creatine supplementation, still well within normal range. And then number two is that the study looks at serum DHT, which plays a much more minor role as a circulating hormone, when in actual fact it's the local conversion of testosterone to local DHT, which will impact hair follicle sites because that has a much more tissue-specific function. So very glad that this is not a true fact, because as someone who grows a very underwhelming beard, I cannot pull off a Jason Statham or Mike Israetel. There have actually been no subsequent increases in or any link between hair loss and creatine in any future studies. It's actually working out in the gym can increase local DHT, which could exacerbate hair loss in those individuals that are prone to male pattern baldness or balding. So there's no real link, it's just an exacerbation that happens. So another one I wanted to cover was, do you need a loading phase? And this is when you take maybe 20 grams a day for the first week, relative to if you just want to take 5 grams a day forever. And the only difference between these two is that, yes, you will see some benefits maybe after a week with a loading phase, whereas if you're doing 5 grams a day, it will take 2 or 3 weeks longer. The downside of doing that loading phase is that you will get some gastrointestinal discomfort, and also you may experience some bloating due to the big increase in water weight all at the same time. So if you can just wait a couple more weeks, I would definitely recommend skipping that loading phase and just going straight to 5 grams a day for the foreseeable. So creatine doesn't cause kidney failure. Where this comes from is that when creatine enters the blood, it increases blood creatinine levels, and blood creatinine is used as a marker to assess kidney function. And this increase is harmless, and it's been completely shown to be safe in the short term. But where this could become an issue is in the long term. If you do have a pre-existing kidney issue, the research isn't there to support how safe it is. So I would just go to your doctor first and just assess whether it is the right thing for you. So to date, creatine has been shown to majorly benefit 3 areas of the body: muscles, brain, and bones. So we definitely have the most research when it comes down to its effect on muscle. And as we learned in part 2, when creatine enters the body, it is formed into phosphocreatine within the muscle. And when our body moves, you've got to keep up with me on the next part here, it will use ATP, adenosine triphosphate, as a fuel source. When ATP is broken down, it breaks down into ADP, adenosine diphosphate. What it will then do is it will bind with the phosphate molecule from the phosphocreatine, form back into ATP. And so what creatine is doing is it's causing ATP to become more readily available, so our muscles can work for longer and our muscle protein synthesis increases. So side note, muscle protein synthesis is the process by which the body repairs and grows new muscle. So this ability to increase the availability of ATP fights muscle fatigue and breakdown. Now this means that our muscles, when we work out, can work out for longer, they can be put under more stress. This will cause more micro tears within the muscle so that it can, combine with more protein molecules to build back bigger and stronger. So additionally, ATP is actually used to activate the mTOR pathway. So indirectly, what creatine is doing by increasing the availability of ATP and via the mTOR pathway is it's increasing or promoting the creation of proteins in muscle cells, which will then lead to muscle hypertrophy and growth. And its anti-inflammatory properties can actually help speed up recovery after intense exercise. So when it comes to brain health, there have actually been a growing number of studies that will link creatine supplementation to higher cognitive function. The first way in which it does this is similar to muscles, actually, because the brain will use ATP as a fuel source. And so by increasing the availability of ATP, we can supply the brain with more energy, which means it can work for longer. Now, another thing is that similar to how we battle muscle fatigue, muscle breakdown, you can actually battle mental fatigue a lot better and stay alert for longer. So the antioxidant properties of creatine can actually help reduce the level of oxidative stress within the brain. And there have been a growing number of studies looking into the applications of this for neurodegenerative diseases and also the symptoms of mood disorders. The evidence isn't there yet for us to take that as gospel, but there are a growing number of studies that will hope to prove that link and that benefit of creatine supplementation. So looking a little bit deeper, creatine can actually influence the growth and the synthesis of neurotransmitters, which are used to send information between brain cells. The benefits of this, the applications, could be huge because any imbalances in these neurotransmitters could lead to neurodegenerative diseases or mental health disorders. So there are a growing number of studies looking into that as well. So a large portion of these cognitive benefits are focused around memory recall and short-term memory. In a 2022 study, they actually found, a positive correlation between creatine supplementation and short-term memory recall relative to a placebo, and there were significant differences found in older demographics. So with this test in particular, we have to take it with a pinch of salt because there was no prior management of blood creatine levels, which meant some of the non-responders could have already had very high levels of creatine. And also there was a lack of heterogeneity, and that just means that within that sample size, there weren't that many genetic differences. And so while the result is, quite beneficial and quite positive, it might not reflect the size of the sample that we actually need. I actually looked into a couple of subsequent studies around similar times that found similar results, actually, that creatine supplementation did lead to increases in memory retention and active recall, but they didn't really find a link between creatine supplementation and executive function. And executive function is where we find, that's where we cover things like problem solving and decision making. So bone health was a new one for me when I looked at this. And before we go into the link between creatine and bone health, we first have to understand what osteoblasts are. Now, osteoblasts are specialized cells that are crucial in that kind of bone formation process because they will create the bone matrix. And then from there, they play a crucial role in regulating bone density and strength. And specifically, the ways in which they're useful is by facilitating a process called mineralization. Now, this is where they strengthen bones by depositing calcium onto the collagen matrix. They also produce new bone tissue, and then they can become embedded within the bone matrix they produce, and then from there they transform into something called an osteocyte. And this osteocyte will maintain bone tissue and regulate bone remodeling. So part of these functions is collagen production, and being that collagen is used as a foundational building block in bone formation, with creatine influencing in a positive way collagen synthesis, this leads to stronger, more resilient bone tissue. So creatine also helps regulate a process called apoptosis, which is also referred to as programmed cell death. Now, apoptosis is completely necessary within the body, and it's the removal or the destruction of cells that are no longer performing their function. The issue is that sometimes this could happen to cells that are maybe undergoing stress due to injury or oxidative stress that are removed prematurely. And so what creatine will do is it will step in and make sure that, specific to bone health, any of those osteoblasts that are under oxidative stress or, a little bit injured won't be removed prematurely, and it will increase the number of osteoblasts we have working to benefit our bone formation. So just to be clear, creatine doesn't actually affect the process itself. It will just regulate it and make sure the right cells are being removed and make it perform more efficiently. So hopefully this helped you tip the scales if you are on the fence about using creatine or not. Just take it any way you can. So for me, I just put it in my protein shake because that's the easiest way to have it. I know what tipped the scales for me when I was doing this research was basically anything that can keep me firing faster and for longer up here is crucial. And so I am really interested to see how this will impact my productivity both at work and at home. Hope you enjoyed, hope this is interesting, and if I don't see you sooner, I'll definitely see you later.